Okay, um, so let's look at an example of a method section. So this is from actually the same paper we talked about for an introduction. Um, just a side note, there's no running head here or page numbers because this is actually separated from the whole paper because this journal, they don't count methods in the word count, so I just pulled it out to get a sense of the word count and stuff like that. So anyways, so this is kind of what the format should look like. It should have method, centered, and in bold, and participants, design if applicable, materials, and procedure. Okay. Again, don't forget the page numbers and running head. So participants were 48 undergraduates from Colorado State Universities. They participated in exchange for course credit. They're mostly female and in their early 20s. One participant, just one other thing, they didn't mention this because probably won't be an issue, but if you have to remove a participant for any reason or several participants, then you can talk about that here. So they were mostly female in their early 20s. One participant was removed for providing the same answer on every trial, and 3 participants were removed due to computer crashes. This left us with 44 participants. Experiment 1 used a one-way 3-level design. So this is what design would look like normally. The independent variable being the fragment type presented in study, first and last letters. Middle letters, no fragments studied, which was manipulated within subjects. Other variables were familiarity ratings and identification percentage. So just a note here, again, there's a little bit of flexibility. You could present an example here under design, but materials is probably going to be better. So I do have an example here with materials. Study and test lists were a total of 120. So like I said, number of trials, how many stimuli you're presenting to people. 128 letter words taken from Cleary and Green 2000. So that's where I got the stimuli from the prior word. 120 words were split up into 4 study and test blocks. Each of course, so it just means that they would study a bunch of words, be tested, study some new words, be tested, study some new words, be tested, and then one more time. Study some words and be tested. That's what I mean by study test blocks. Each of the 4 study blocks contained 20 fragments. So in both conditions, study fragments contain the second and second last letter. This was done. So again, this is kind of what I mean in terms of explaining your materials, if need be. So what we ended up doing is, again, we're having people study these fragments like you see here, or these fragments here, or within subjects. We would expect to see that this is going to create when you see the full word, this is going to create a stronger sense of familiarity than this. But because when you use only 2 letters, so one at the start and one at the end, there becomes too many that overlap, so there aren't enough unique combinations of words. So that's what I'm explaining here. Many words repeated, so we added not just the first and last letter, which was our main interest, but also these, whether either condition had the second and second last, so the A and the O, and then explain why that was done, because again, too many words would end up being repeated, so squirrel and shrapnel would both be shown as S and O. 10 of those fragments contain the first and last letter, as well as the second and second last letter. Again, examples, very good. The other 10 fragments contain the middle 2 letters as well as the second and second last letters. As can be seen in these 2 examples, the letters were replaced with underscores. Consecutive underscores also had spaces between them to help participants see the number of letters missing. So again, lots of detail here, leave no stone unturned. Each of the 4 test blocks contained 30 words. So again, number of stimuli. Of those 30 words, 10 corresponded to fragments containing first and last letter, the first and last letter, as well as second and second last letter. Raindrop, example, raindrop. 10 test words corresponded to fragments whose middle 2 as well as second and second last letter were shown. And then the last 10 words did not correspond to a study fragment. The order of the items in each study and test block were randomized. So again, order very important. 3 versions, this is the counterbalancing. 3 versions of the experiments were made so that each word appeared equally often in all 3 conditions. So that's what we mean by counterbalancing. So in one condition, or in one version of the experiment, raindrop would have appeared like this with the first and last letters. In another version, raindrop would have appeared with its interior letters, so whatever those would have been. In the third version, raindrop, the fragment of raindrop would not have been studied. So that way, and again, we did this for all the words, but that way it's not, any effect is because of our manipulation, not because of differences in materials across condition, because the materials are appearing equally often in each condition. Okay, procedure. Participants were tested individually in separate rooms on a computer. I should say on computers, I think. The experiment was programmed into ePrime. So ePrime is just a software you can use to create experiments. So that's what we use to kind of display all the materials and stuff. Instructions, again, don't forget that. Participants were told that they would see a list of fragments and try to complete them. Later, they would do a memory test, which would be explained when they got to it. For each of the study blocks, the fragments appeared one at a time in the center of the screen in black on a white background. Again, lots of detail. Each fragment appeared for 2 seconds before participants tried to complete it. This was done so that participants would not go through the fragments without making any attempt to solve them. After 2 seconds, type the whole word if you can appeared below the fragment. Participants pressed enter when they had typed their answer or gave up on completing the fragment. Beyond the initial 2 seconds, completing the fragment was self-paced. After going through the 20 fragments of the first study block, participants began the first test block. They were told that they would now see whole words and rate them as to how strongly they believe they studied a fragment of the whole word being shown. 0 meaning definitely not studied, 10 meaning definitely studied. The first block consisted of 30 full words. Participants were asked, how familiar is this word to you? So again, what exactly you tell participants is an important detail, always an important detail to include, because if I ask them something different in terms of this rating, maybe I would get a different result. Type answer, press enter. So how are they giving their response? This was then repeated for 3 more study and test blocks. Participants type the number from 0 to 10 and then pressed enter to advance to the next trial. On completing all 30 test words in a block, the next study block began. So again, just to kind of reiterate, lots of detail, like I've said like 10 times, lots of detail here, enough that you could basically read this carefully and copy my experiment exactly. Right? I know where I got the materials, I know exactly how they were made, all that stuff. Like I said, no stone left unturned.